I have no idea. I'm not sure what sort of giant person-eating monster I should be expecting in a tropical volcano. Thematically speaking, that is. Steve replied as frowned. But soon they came out on a stone walkway extending over a massive underwater lake of some kind. Steve peered over the side and the water below them seemed to be pitch black. Upon seeing that, he shuddered briefly. Okay, pitch black water is never good. Right? It just makes your brain wonder what's down there, Sherry muttered. So what are we thinking? Kraken? Giant squid? Giant octopus? Giant shark? Ill-tempered seals? Fenrina asked. You seem very casual in asking that, Steve mentioned as he watched the werehusky walk out across the walkway, sword and shield in hand. Considering all the stuff we've fought and killed so far, am I supposed to be surprised by giant sea creatures? She asked, and Steve nodded as he conceded to her point. However, when they were about halfway across the lake, he looked over the side once more and thought he saw some giant spots moving quickly. Giant eel, he hissed. Spread out and then don't move much. Their eyes suck. However, it didn't try and breach the water to eat one of them. It didn't have the right build for that after all. It swam up and just under the walkway as they could see the massive dorsal fin rubbing against it, causing the whole walkway to lift and then bob in the water, making them stagger around as they tried to stay on their feet, and more importantly on the walkway. Larry was sure-footed since he had a low center of gravity, and Sherry was able to tumble forward into a roll and then pop back up, but Fenrina and Steve were both knocked onto their hands and knees. It's trying to knock us into the water, Sherry cried out. Yes, thank you. Got it now, Steve hissed. What do we do? Fenrina asked, trying to get up on her feet just as the eel swam under them once more, knocking her back down. The Tiki mentioned feeding her, so he's got to have a way to do that. Look around, Steve said, and narrowly avoided rolling into the water while Sherry and Larry looked for a solution. Does that look like a lightning rod to anyone else? Larry asked, and pointed across the water at a tall metal rod that ran down into a blue crystal. Yes, gotta be it. Somehow, Steve muttered, and rose up on his knees as he quickly moved his hands in the pattern to cast a lightning bolt at it. The metal rod sang for a moment once the lightning bolt hit, and the crystal glowed bright blue before there was a surge of some sort, as the blue light traveled down deep into the otherwise pitch-black water. Then deep below them, they saw what looked like giant jellyfish jet out from inside a cave. They were gorgeous in a way, illuminating the water around them in bright blues, whites, and even pinks and purples. But as they watched, the shadowy figure of the eel dove and collided with one. The massive moray engulfed the jellyfish in its massive jaws, tearing it apart as it pulsed and then began to glow. They could see a faint outline of the spots along its back at first, and then it began to grow brighter with every jellyfish it ate. Why don't we leave before we find out what happens if it gets to full brightness? Sherry suggested as she helped Fenrina up. Yeah, good call. Steve agreed and staggered up to his feet, trying to keep on the rocking and rolling walkway in the water. Just as they got to the far side and the safety of the shore, he turned and looked down to see the eel glowing bright, crackling with energy as it dove deeper into the water below them, vanishing into a cave for a moment. He wasn't sure what it found in there, but a massive bolt of lightning shot up from the center of the lake, then striking at the ceiling. He looked up to see a whole network of crystals and rods blinked. Wow, that looks amazing, he muttered. But as the rods and crystals began to crackle and hiss further, he realized what was going to happen next. Oh shit, keep going. He pushed the others ahead of him into the cave as behind him a lightning storm broke out over the lake. He had no idea what the point of it all was, but it was certainly deadly to anyone standing out in the open as bolts of lightning snapped and struck all around the cavern they'd just been in. As they pressed forward, the dark cave around them began to grow light blue, and then brighter still, as they saw the halls and ceiling were filled with very finely worked crystal lines. The lines made up images of the natives and their journey, or at least, that's the best Steve could guess. They saw outlines of islands, fish, boats, and from what he could tell as he looked up at the ceiling, some sort of map through the stars themselves. Or perhaps just a map using the stars to navigate the ocean. He didn't know their language, so he couldn't say for sure, but the halls around them hummed with electrical energy now, which no doubt had been the point of the assembly in the cavern behind them. Along the way, he noticed there was a figure that didn't seem to be directly noted, but was always present, watching over the journey of the natives across the ocean. Some sort of being of water, perhaps? "Hey, Steve, doesn't that look like the Archon?" Steve blinked in surprise as Sherry said that, and looked forward as they came to a larger open chamber. All around them it looked like the natives were bowing before and worshipping a massive woman made of stars from the night sky. Sort of," he muttered with a frown. "But there were other Archons before her, you know. If this was her work, I'm sure she'd have told us." "Hey, look! That's us!" Now Steve looked towards Fenrina as she pointed to a drawing in the corner that seemed to show a very basic image of a dog, a woman with horns, a short person with a hammer, and a tall figure with a goatee. They were standing on a giant mountain of skulls. "That's us, right? What's with the skulls?" Fenrina asked. I'm sure it's not us," Steve assured her. "I've got a beard right now, and you're not a dog, not really." As he said that, Fenrina nodded. "Yeah, you're right. Good call." She nodded as he pointed that out. "So, how do we get out?" "I'm ahead of you on that one," Sherry mentioned, and twisted a dial on the wall where the big picture of the Star Woman was. There was a groan then, and the wall between the Star Woman's legs slowly sank into the ground to reveal a set of stairs beyond it. "That set of stars wasn't aligned properly," she explained. "You know, Larry Love always did want to get between the Archon's thighs," Larry said as he began to walk up the stairs first. "I'll tell her you said that you know," Steve threatened. "She'll turn you into a newt. Or worse, she'll only turn part of you into a newt. Let's not get so hasty just yet. Larry Love was just making a joke is all. Larry Love respects your mother. Oh, I mean your boss." Steve glared at Larry, but the dwarf just grinned wide back at him as they headed up the stairs. As they ascended the stairs, the air got hotter and hotter as they saw an orange glow ahead of them. "Gotta be in the bowels of the volcano now," Steve muttered, and sure enough, as they came out, they found themselves on a cliff above of a lake of lava. Before them was a suspiciously fragile-looking wood bridge, connecting them to a much large central pillar. There they could see the members of Crap, as well as several other Kasurian soldiers doing battle with a giant stone golem painted in much the same way the Tiki Man had been. He was trying to protect some sort of altar, and Steve knew that was their objective. "Shit, we need to get across that bridge right now before they see us," he urged, and they began to run across the swaying wood and rope bridge. As they watched, however, Quarry their mage turned the golem's legs to ice, and then Arturian broke them apart with his sword. Even as the golem hit the ground and shattered, they were going for the altar. "You lose this time, necromancer," the Kasurian noble called out. "I'm not a fucking necromancer," Steve howled as they neared the end of the bridge. Fenrina and Larry were just on the other side as the elven ranger Arisha quickly brought up her bow. Steve formed a barrier ahead of him, but she wasn't aiming for him. Instead, 2 arrows sliced through the rope supports on this end of the bridge. Steve quickly turned and jumped for the edge, reaching out to grab Sherry's arm even as she began to fall with the bridge. As he squeezed her arm hard, he gasped out, nearly feeling his shoulder pop from the socket with the strain of taking her weight and holding her at the edge. "I gotcha, sweetie," he groaned. "Steve," Sherry hissed. "Let go." "No, I won't. I'm not." "Shut up and let me go," Sherry hissed once more as she squirmed in his grip. "I won't let you sacrifice yourself. That's a lake of lava." He gasped, trying to grip her arm better to hold on to her. "Like the one I swam in every summer back home? In hell," she reminded him as he blinked and looked down at her. "Oh yeah, I forget you're a demon sometimes." He let go then and watched as she turned and spun to swan dive into the lava below. She surfaced a few feet away, then swimming for the nearest point she could get out of. He stood up then and groaned as he rolled his shoulder, having injured it for no real reason. Fortin and Larry were locked in their typical holy poetry slam as they smashed each other with hammers and holy verses. Fenrina and Arturian were dueling, and the soldiers were busy with the altar. But what confused him was what Quarry and Arisha were doing. Quarry seemed to be casting something on a large arrow that Arisha had. He didn't have long to wonder before the elven ranger fired the arrow at the far wall of the open lava chamber, however. Once it hit the rock, it exploded in a bright flash, and Steve turned away, blinking away spots for a moment as the whole side of the cliff was opened up. Waiting on the other side is a giant butterfly that quickly flew into the opening. Steve looked between Larry and Fenrina as he tried to figure out who to help, but then the Kasurian soldiers were rushing at him. Steve yanked his gladius free and screamed in the face of the first soldier, raising his sword high in the air. As the soldier raised his shield and looked up at the sword, Steve instead kicked him in the balls. While the first soldier dropped to his knees in pain, Steve had to quickly parry a strike from the second. But rather than get caught in a proper sword fight, he fused his free hand with magic and slapped the soldier across the face, hitting him with his stone sleep slap, sending the soldier flying back across the plateau into the third soldier. Before he could aid either friend yet, though Steve howled in pain as he got hit in the ass with an arrow as he looked over at Irisia grinning at him. "What is with it, and shooting me in the ass with an arrow?" He cried out and groaned as clutched the arrow shaft sticking out of his butt. "It makes for such a big target, fatty!" she cried back. "You shut up!" He screamed at her and then turned to kick their own dwarf, Fortin, in the head while he was battling with Larry. Not having been paying attention to Steve, the hostile dwarf took the blow to the head hard, staggering back and opening him up for Larry to ring his bell with a hammer blow upside the other side of the head. He staggered back further, stumbling about in a daze. Besides him, Fenrina actually chomped down on Arturian's arm in her mouth and used the opening to drive her blade up under his armpit where the armor was weak. She couldn't bring her sword in a direct stab, but was able to run the blade along his armpit and cut it open deep. It was a very good blow to his sword arm, and it had Arturian howl in pain. However, they couldn't capitalize on their advantage as Quarry shouted out, "Now!" Arturian threw himself away from Fenrina, and Fortin turned to stone just as she extended her arms, and a massive gust of wind slammed into Steve and his friends. They were sent tumbling back to the edge of the stone pillar, while Steve desperately dragged his sword against the stone to try and slow his slide, which succeeded somewhat, but his legs were pushed over the edge before he stopped, leaving him partially hanging over the edge. Larry was trying to roll over and up from his back, but he wasn't very graceful. Fenrina, meanwhile, had taken the full brunt of the blast and had only managed to stop from being thrown off by jamming her shield into a crack in the edge, which she was now hanging from. Steve was trying to pull himself up, but it wasn't easy since he'd injured his shoulder trying to save Sherry, who hadn't needed saving. Arturian watched them for a moment, and Steve was wondering how they'd deal with an attack. But thankfully, Quarry called out to him, "There's no time! We have the relics for King Gorlan! These savages will have to accept him as their king." Arturian glared at Steve, but soon ran to the giant butterfly and climbed up on its back as Fortin and the 3 Kasurian soldiers scurried to catch up and not be left behind. Steve could do little but try and claw back up on top of the pillar while they escaped on the giant butterfly. Once he was up on top, he stretched out on his stomach, gasping for air. "Fuck, I need to practice pull-ups," he grumbled while Larry got to his feet and quickly went to the edge to help Fenrina up. Steve finally climbed up to his feet as well and looked down below to see Sherry climbing her way up a rocky path up the side of the chamber to try and get back over to them. Did we lose?" Steve looked back at Fenrina, who Larry had helped up onto the platform, and he just looked at the massive hole in the wall for a moment. "We lost the natives' relics, and the Kasurian king might be about to try and force the locals to accept him as their king and not Dwayne, which means at the very least we failed, and in fact, more likely we're about to be banned from these islands." He let that hang in the air for a few seconds before taking a deep breath. "Fuck! Fuck! Fuck! Fuck me! Fuck them! Fuck this shit! Fuck that noise! Fuck! Fuck! Fuckity! Fuck! Fucking fuck! Fucking fuck! Maximum fuck!" After that, he took several deep breaths, only to have Larry yank the arrow from his ass in the meantime. "Enga! Fuck!" was all he could manage after his outburst, and he rubbed his sore cheek in the meantime. As he stood there, Steve realized he had to make things right. both for the possible alliance between Almera and these islanders, and so he could come back to this island paradise and actually get to enjoy it. This is the part the bards never sing of, because few people were around to see it. The Khazurian soldiers were sworn to secrecy, and neither adventuring group had any reason to speak about it. It was Steve's first loss to Crap, though few ever realized it. He has had far more famous losses, especially his second. But their feud had decades to go still, and no war is without losses before eventual victory. Steve's revenge, however, is far more well known, and rightfully so considering the grand spectacle that it was in the Khazurian court. However, that is a story for another time.